you are in the unfortunate position of being cornered on this council. You have been forced to make a choice and to choose a side in what is essentially part of the culture wars. The fact of the matter is that MacDonald was one of the most enlightened, progressive men of his time. And the key phrase in that sentence is of his time. To evaluate MacDonald on the basis of modern sensibilities is to commit what one might call presentism. And that is to do exactly that, to assess people on the basis of present sensibilities. But if you do that, the challenge is this. There probably is no one person alive at the time of MacDonald that would pass that test. European, indigenous, or the like. And so we must evaluate MacDonald on the basis of his own time. And the fact of the matter is that, as was pointed out in the previous deputation, MacDonald is responsible for the existence of this country. This is really not about MacDonald. I mean, MacDonald is accused of lots of different things, including forcing indigenous children to go to residential schools, forcing indigenous people to starve on the prairies when the buffalo left. But the historical record is much different, of course. Residential schools did exist at the time MacDonald came to power, but they did not become compulsory until the 1920s, almost 30 years after MacDonald's death. Furthermore, when the famine struck on the prairies, MacDonald did everything in his power to provide aid, to the extent that the opposition in the House of Commons objected to the amount of aid that MacDonald was ordering. This was at a time when the welfare state did not exist, and this was not the kind of thing that governments commonly did. But, in fact, in my opinion, this is not really about MacDonald at all. You'll hear lots of opinions about MacDonald the man, but in my submission, Mr. Mayor, this is more about who gets to tell the story of this country. MacDonald is revered because he founded this nation, and he is hated for exactly the same reason. So the choice you really have to make is between accepting the story that Canada is a racist, oppressive place, or that it is one of those countries in the world that stands out as a place of freedom, democracy, equality, prosperity, and progress. Essentially a shining city on the hill where people from all over the world wish to come. Both things can't be true. And I'm afraid you're in a position to have to choose one. If I may say so, this situation is precipitated and based upon an academic thing called critical race theory. And critical race theory is not really a theory at all. It is a doctrine or an agenda. And that agenda says this, that Western nations are based upon an oppressive culture in which some racial groups, identity groups, are oppressed by others in a situation where every relationship is based upon power. And in that narrative, white people are all racist, and people who are not white, and especially indigenous people in North America, are victims. And if you are applying that theory, then it is inevitable that a man like MacDonald must be a villain, because he is the man who managed to put this country together. He managed to do so, mind you, in a way that was essentially bloodless, without violence. Now, of course, that's not literally true. There's always a little bit of violence everywhere, and mistakes are made, and trouble comes, and so on. But if you compare the histories of countries around the world, this country, largely because of MacDonald, has a history that is as peaceful as one could imagine. If we want to condemn MacDonald with that kind of history, well, then go ahead. But is that really the story we want to tell about our own country? So critical race theory makes this the era of the mob. And I'm afraid the mob has descended upon you and demanded to be able to tell the story they want to tell. And that story is McDonald is an evil man. It's actually not true at all, but that's the story they wish to tell. Which leads me to, if I may, the meaning of reconciliation. We are in an era of reconciliation, apparently. That's what we are told. But reconciliation is starting to mean something that the word doesn't suggest. To reconcile means to bring two sides together, to reach a common understanding so you can move forward together. The meaning of the word that's coming to apply, however, is something quite different. It's starting to mean that you must trash the history of the country, and you must call the founders of the country villains. You must dismiss and deprecate one of the cultures involved in this process of reconciliation. And in my view, proceeding that way with this project will result in exactly the opposite of what reconciliation is intended to mean. You don't achieve reconciliation by trashing one side and giving into the demands of the other. It's supposed to be an understanding and a bridging of differences, not an attack of one against the other. So your task is not enviable, and I wish you luck with the choice that you are going to make. But as I said at the beginning, I'm afraid that choice is one thing or the other. It will be very difficult for you in the present circumstances to maneuver around this, and my heart goes out to you. The implications of making the choice is that the mob will rule or it won't. And I hope you will choose to honor and respect the man who made Canada possible and made it possible in a way which benefits everybody who lives in this country. He is the man who made peace, order, and good government possible and made this kind of democratic debate happen. And with that, I will leave you and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. Thank you.